He's a doper. He's guilty. That win is not clean. So the Olympics are some of the best sporting events in the entire world, and it brings out the best of human performance, and it brings our entire society and culture together to compete against other countries in the pursuit of gold medals and nationalistic pride. But oftentimes that comes with a large suspicion of drug use. Hi, I am retired professional triathlete TJ Tollickson, CEO of Diamond Bikes, and today we're going to examine the history of drug use in the Olympics and how those drugs relate to the sport of triathlon. So in 1967, the International Olympic Committee, abbreviated IOC, first got together and decided that they were going to ban drugs in the Olympics. So yes, that means all the Olympic Games before 1968, there was no drug testing. It was a free-for-all, do as you want, experiment as you want, and that's that. So we're not going to talk about anything past 1968 Olympics, but the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, Mexico, were the first games that the International Olympic Committee had a drug testing panel, tested athletes, and the very first athlete they caught was from Sweden. His name was Hans Gunnar Liljenwall, and he was a modern pentathlete, so that means swimming, running, horseback riding, fencing, and pistol shooting. Yes, it's very modern, I know, but it is 5 sports, and he actually tested positive for ethanol. Not the gas, beer. So ethanol is alcohol, so this guy actually admitted that he drank 2 beers before the competition to steady his arm when he was shooting his pistol. Had he just watched the Olympics this year, he'd have had that hand in the pocket, piece of cake, fired a couple shots, no glasses, nothing, he'd have been fine. But he drank 2 beers, and while beers were not actually on the list of banned substances, because he used them for a performance enhancement, he was guilty, and his entire team was banned from the competition because of that. Now, there was one other athlete in 1968 who was banned as well, and it was a Bulgarian wrestler who used smelling salts. Okay, the only funny thing about this is that as soon as Michael Strahan retired from the NFL, he said that 70 to 80% of all NFL players use smelling salts every game. So it tells you how prevalent that is. And smelling salts, by the way, are banned in the Olympics. Every Olympic Games since 1968, athletes have tested positive for banned substances. There was one exception. The 1980 Olympics in Moscow, okay, the United States did not attend those Olympics, but the 1980 Games in Moscow, there were 0 athletes with positive tests. Now, rumor has it that the reason there was no positive tests, and I don't have facts to actually back this up, was because Russia actually put fake drug testers.
Doctors Trowbridge and Greenbaum.
Doctor?
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 To act like they were drug testers and scare other countries from using drugs. Meanwhile, they didn't actually test anybody, so they had no ambitions of catching anybody for drug use. We don't know, but it does stand out as the only anomaly. That's the only Olympic Games since drug testing was invented that nobody tested positive. So we probably know that, yes, there was some weird anomaly going on. In the 1984 Olympics, which were hosted in LA, USA Cycling actually had a federation-sponsored blood doping program. So you heard me say he's a doper. Well, blood doping actually refers to a process of doping your own blood, meaning you take your own blood out of your body. So a familiar scene you might see with cycling is an athlete might go do a training camp at high altitude. Their body produces more red blood cells at high altitude. They would then take some of that blood out. 3 months later, they have the advantage of the higher red blood cell count naturally, but then they've got a bag of blood that has really high concentration of red blood cells that before the race they can put back in. And so that's actually your own blood.
Nobody makes me bleed my own blood.
Right? You're not using anybody else's blood. You're not taking a drug. That's just regular old-fashioned blood doping. So in 1984 Olympics, USA Cycling had its own program where they were blood doping their athletes. Now you're saying this seems really shady. Why? Well, it wasn't until 1986 that the Olympics banned blood doping. And I can tell you the reason they banned blood doping is they realized so many of these people, including USA Cycling as a federation, were using blood doping, and they realized, wow, this is really dangerous and pretty crazy. What if somebody takes out too much blood or somebody puts in too much blood? This is crazy. We should put an end to it. So they did. And it wasn't until 2000 that we had the first positive test in the Olympics for what is now EPO. So erythropoietin is a drug that increases the red blood cell concentration in your body. So the benefits of a red blood cell increase are that red blood cells are what carry oxygen in your body. So this is what Lance Armstrong also admitted to using. But EPO is a powerhouse drug, and a lot of cancer patients use it because they need it to just survive and have enough energy to get on with daily life. But athletes have been abusing EPO for a very, very long time because it gives you an unreal performance-enhancing benefit that seems very natural, in that all of a sudden you used to get tired from running at this pace, and now you don't get tired at this pace. You can run 14% faster on average by having more red blood cells in your body. So it wasn't until 2000 that we had this as a problem. How does this relate to the sport of triathlon? Well, triathlon started long before they tested for drugs, but long after the Olympics had tested for drugs. You have to remember the first Olympic Games for the sport of triathlon wasn't until 2000. So largely before 2000, there was very little drug testing at any triathlon globally. Now, the very first year they tested for drugs at the Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii was 1997. This is also a peculiar story that I'm not going to accuse this person of using drugs. I'm just going to point out the peculiarities of this to you. So in 1996, a Kona rookie out of Belgium named Luc van Lierde set the Ironman World Championship record, course record that stood for 17 years, 8:04. Again, this is 1996. Luke went 8:04 in Kona, destroyed everybody else in the race by quite a bit. Now, it was a fast year, so I'll give him that. The second and third place finishers were also fast. Then fast forward to the following year, 1997. It would have been Luke's second year trying to race the Ironman World Championships. He set an all-time best Ironman distance record in Roth that year, in Roth, Germany. He went 7 hours and 50 minutes. Okay? He came into Hawaii that year with a whole bunch of fanfare. He was the next biggest thing. He was going to win. And then in 1997, when the athletes were in Hawaii, the Ironman organization announced at the press conference that they were going to drug test all the athletes for the first time ever. The reigning champion, Luc van Lierde, all of a sudden immediately left the Big Island, flew back to Belgium, reportedly to have surgery on his foot that was at risk of an infection from a previous injury. It seems a lot of very convenient, peculiar timing. Is the reigning Ironman world champion using drugs? Is he afraid to take a drug test? We don't actually know, but we know he never went faster than 8:04 at the Ironman World Championships again. He did return and win the race. He finished second once, and then he won the race. But he didn't ever go as fast. I'm not saying he used drugs. I'm not saying he didn't use drugs. I'm saying there were some very strange situations surrounding that. But it's also strange that the sport of triathlon, which a lot of people think has a history that was very clean and didn't use drugs, was surrounded in all of these controversies. I will say one other thing that's very important, that before, again, 1986, blood doping was a legal method of performance enhancement, according to the International Olympic Committee. So, of high question then is all of the great triathletes that won the Ironman World Championships prior to 1986, were they blood doping? If they were blood doping, again, this was not against the rules, is that still okay? In my eyes, I would say yes, that's okay, because they were doing something that was on the cutting edge of science and technology for performance enhancement, but wasn't against the rules. The question then becomes, what happens to those athletes moving forward? They still have an advantage because they did years of blood doping, so they got that advantage and were able to maintain it. So what are these drugs that athletes are testing positive for at the Olympics and in the sport of triathlon? Well, in the Olympics in general, usually athletes are testing positive for 3 different things. They're testing positive for anabolic steroids, so a whole class of steroids that are used to specifically increase your testosterone production. Okay? The second thing they're testing positive for are stimulants. Okay, yes, coffee is a stimulant. No, coffee is not banned. It has been banned before, not coffee in particular, but caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant. So caffeine was on the monitored list for a while, and now it's legal at any amount you want to take. But there are a whole bunch of other stimulants, amphetamines, cocaine, that have a similar effect to caffeine, just way better, that athletes use to gain an advantage. And the nice thing about a stimulant like that is it's a short-term effect. You can take one small dose of drugs and it has an effect right away. It also clears your system relatively quickly. The last class of drugs that we see very commonly used are peptide hormones. So you've heard people talk about human growth hormone. Human growth hormone is a peptide hormone, and there is a whole new class of designer peptide hormones that people are using because they're still undetectable by the testing agencies. So what does all this have to do with the sport of triathlon right now? Well, many of you recall in 2023, Colin Chartier tested positive for EPO and later admitted to using it, and I will say that that's a big anomaly. Before Colin, the last high-level triathlete that admitted to using drugs was the Ironman world champion in 2004 on the female side, Nina Kraft. Destroyed many of the pro men, the entire women's field. She tested positive for EPO, later admitted it, served her ban, and came back and raced, which was also very controversial. But so it was a long time, almost 20 years before we had another major doping scandal in the sport of triathlon. There have been several minor ones that I talked about in another video I did about drugs, but largely avoided major scandals. That's all the way up until 2024. This year, the men's winner of Ironman Texas, Thomas Rodriguez Hernandez, who had by far the fastest, an absolutely blazing run split, course record run split, tested positive for clomiphene. Now, Mr. Thomas Rodriguez Hernandez has vehemently denied taking this drug and that it was mainly from his high diet of chicken and eggs. And so what is clomiphene and why would somebody use it? So clomiphene is a drug prescribed to women to try to get them pregnant. It actually induces ovulation. Why would somebody use clomiphene if it induces ovulation, especially a male? Well, the response clomiphene has in the male body is that it then counteracts the high estrogen level from the clomiphene by producing more natural testosterone. So his testosterone levels would then be elevated, which would then make him have a similar effect to an anabolic steroid, but he has no anabolic steroids in his system. He has instead a drug called clomiphene. What if I had ingested clomiphene by eating all the eggs that I eat every day and tested positive? Well, it's easy to say without being in that situation that I would just retire and walk away from the sport. But it's harder to do if you're in that situation. You would feel cheated and beat by a system that let so many other people who used drugs and got away with it scot-free. So the bottom line of the whole story is, can you really believe any performance that you ever see? Probably not. History shows a long list of athletes have doped. And again, this is not new. Since the first IOC testing in 1968 all the way to the current Olympics, there will be athletes who test positive for drugs and are banned. But far more are the athletes that take those drugs and never get caught. Just like our buddy Lance Armstrong, he took probably thousands of drug tests over his career and somehow managed to evade being caught for drug testing. It wasn't until our Senate investigated him with a special committee that they finally got him to admit that yes, he had used all kinds of illegal drugs for the entirety of his professional career. He was later stripped of all 7 titles of Tour de France. That right there is enough for me to tell you that you should probably question everything that seems unbelievable. At the same time, you should be awe-inspired by the feat of human glory regardless. And while you should be skeptical of any performance that seems too good to be true, you should also celebrate every race and every competition, because racing is one of the best things that we have. Competition is one of the best things we have as a society that brings us together, helps us feel like we're a part of something, and the friendly competition is something that betters our society as a whole. Thanks for tuning in to my rant about drugs, the Olympics, and the sport of triathlon. If you are looking for the fastest way to increase your performance without chemical alterations, check out our full line of Diamond bikes and Red Crown cycling products. We make absolutely the fastest equipment on the planet. So if you're looking to get from point A to point B on a bike as fast as possible, we've got the bike for you.
Thank you very much.